This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Headscarves and Good Yarns with me, Amal. The show is all about talking about race, diversity and everything in between, all in the hopes of empowering a more empathetic Aotearoa. We talk about all these huge life things through the lens of people's lives and stories. I hope every yarn you take a wee gem from it and expands your heart and mind just a wee bit more. Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. I know that I've had an episode out since the new year, but this is the first time that I'm actually recording for 2025. So very much still feeling the happy new year energy. I think as I've gotten older, like the new year has become less of a deal in the sense that, like, you know, life still moves on, and there are other points in the year where it feels, you know, maybe more appropriate to feel like it's that new year energy. Like I went away over New Year's with my friends, and we were talking about goals and resolutions and maybe what we want more of and less of in this year. And one of my friends made a really good point that they actually don't really feel the need to do that at the beginning of a new year, but it feels more appropriate to do that at Matariki. And I really loved that, and it made me realize that actually, you know, we don't have to put all of our eggs in one basket at the beginning of the year, and there are many different New Years that are significant to different cultures. And so, you know what, this year, Matariki, I also hopefully will be sitting in with that energy of reflection, and I feel like that makes a lot more sense with it being the winter, and there's something about winter that's very nourishing. But anyways, I just wanted to say, you know, Happy New Year, but also it's okay if it's not like that moment in the year where you're like, okay, goals, resolutions, like new year, new me. If that's what it is for you, cool. And if that's what it isn't, also cool. But either way, I hope everyone has had a good break and feeling like they can just hit the ground running as we kind of get back into things, get back into the routine of things. And because this is kind of like New Year energy, and this typically is the time where people are thinking about, you know, what 2025 is going to look like going ahead, and what is it that they, you know, what goals or resolutions or what is it that you want to work on this year. I thought that it might be a good time, this episode, to kind of focus on action and how is it that the things that you should be thinking about, you know, when you're getting into that mindset of how can I be a better ally, or, you know, how can I show up for my values, or how can I show up to the kaupapas that I'm really interested about. And I really wanted to make this episode, A, because, you know, it is a new year and people will be kind of thinking about these things this time of the year, but B, and this is something that I was thinking about a lot over the break, is that, or just kind of when I was reflecting on the year that has just passed, so many things happened in 2024 that, and this is me just speaking for myself now, that did make me go, oh, or, you know, made me feel angry at the state of the world, or makes me feel anxious about the state of the world, you know, whether it's thinking about, you know, climate change is becoming more and more apparent, or the ongoing genocide in Gaza. You know, there were so many things that happened that made me go, oh, or, you know, even towards the end of last year, the big hikoi towards Parliament, and just the wider conversation that we're having about
honouring te tiriti, and I think even wider than that, just the conversation around race relations here in Aotearoa, and how we as a society, as a country, treat tangata whenua in their own land. All of these things, a lot of these things happened last year, which made me go, oh, like there's a lot happening in the world that I feel, in my opinion, isn't okay. And when these things happen, the world is begging for us to change. But to kind of get to that point where the world changes and everyone is living in an equitable world where people have the opportunity to thrive, it's going to take systematic overhauls and lots of really brave, vulnerable conversations, and it's going to take a lot, right? And I think there are things that happened last year that makes it feel like, what change is going to happen, or, if things like this keep happening, are we going to have change by default? And I think when I was reflecting overall about last year, I was just thinking, well, regardless of who's elected, or, regardless of what's happening in the world, that the work still needs to be done. The work will be continued. When I was reflecting, I was really reassured by that, because, with framing like that, there's still accountability and agency. And, when you think about how change happens, not that there's like a set in stone how change happens, but a huge component or a huge ingredient of that is community, is grassroots activation. And that's something that can still happen. That's something that can still be done even when systems are systeming. The work still needs to be done, and the work will be done. And I think that is the energy that I would really like to focus on right now, especially when, so many, on the back of 2024 finishing and so many things happening. That's what I would really like to focus on, is the work still needs to be done, and it will be done, and it will be continued by those who continue to show up to be an ally, show up to the kaupapas that they're interested in. And so I really want to focus this episode on action. How is it that you take action? And what does that look like? I think there's so many guides out there, on how to show up and how to be a better ally. But I think there are some things that I would really like to hone on. Nothing revolutionary, but I think things that aren't discussed enough, because even before you go, before you get into action, before you press go, there are things that you need to go before you go into action mode. And I think these things, again, they're not revolutionary, but things that I think great grounding. And when you have really good grounding, the avenues for action that come through, they are just fruitful, and they are flowing, if that makes sense. Like, you know how there's always that metaphor of like when you look after yourself, you're filling your cup up, right? And when I think about that metaphor, or just, you know, that metaphor of filling your cup up, you want to fill your cup up so much that not only is it full, that it overflows. And when it overflows, it will feed into something else. And I think when you really ground yourself before you go into action mode, not only will you fill your cup up, but your cup will overflow. It will overflow into the communities that you want to be involved in. It will overflow into the kaupapas that you're really interested in and would love to show up for. It will overflow into other people's cups and inspire more action, and it will overflow and fill in those impact gaps that are currently missing. And I think that overflow state only really comes when you've really grounded yourself into you've really grounded yourself before you go straight into action. Because I think that's something that happens a lot, where, and there's nothing absolutely wrong with this, but when this doesn't happen, when there isn't that like deep grounding, it just makes me think about, well, where's the sustainability in that, and how do we keep the momentum going? And so I really wanted to highlight some things that have really helped me, I think. And this is something that I return to time and time again when I'm thinking about what does action look like for me right now. And also, I think the past maybe like 5 to 6 years, dare I say, so much has happened in like the social impact, social justice space, in the sense that things are a lot more accessible. And I think there have been some really big movements the past couple of years that have really invited people to step in. But when that happens so quickly, I don't think everyone goes through that like grounding phase. And so then the action isn't sustainable and it kind of dissipates. Or if there is action, it's gone about in a way where it's maybe not the most helpful, sometimes harmful. And I think, you know, if we all kind of sat with ourselves before we got into action mode, we can reach that overflow state, as opposed to, because another great thing about the overflow metaphor is that there's movement, like it's overflowing into something else, and then fingers crossed that will overflow into something else. But if it isn't, if it's allyship or solidarity or action that isn't 100% helpful, is maybe superficial or performative, or, you know, even, you know, well-intentioned, but doesn't actually help the cause, there's no way of reaching like an overflow there. It's very stagnant. And I think that's what we'd like to avoid, right? So, this episode, fingers crossed, will be some golden nuggets for y'all, and help reframe, inspire, and help ground y'all before you get into action mode, whatever that looks like for you in 2025. So the first thing that I want to talk about, the first thing that I want to talk about, and this is something that has really, really helped me over the years think about how is it that I want to show up for the world. And if by any funny chance you have done the leadership award, then you are going to know, you're going to know exactly what I'm going to say. But there's this thing called the social change model. And I happened to come across the social change model whilst I was working at the university of Otago, and there's this program called the Leadership Award, and the whole kaupapa of it is to understand that social impact can come in so many different forms, and it can be actioned by anyone. Like everyone can be a leader. It's not necessarily, the ones who have the title, the ones who have the loudest voice in the room. Anyone can be a leader, because anyone can do social impact. And the framework that we use for the Leadership Award is the social change model, and it is quite academic. Like, you look at the diagram and you're like, damn, this should belong in a textbook. It is quite academic-y, but it's so amazing, and it's something that I came across it because of mahi, but it's something that guides me in my day-to-day, and it guides me in my personal life as well, which I'm just so grateful for. And it's not something that you consciously think about every single day, but I think since I've become familiar with the social change model, I think my understanding about who I am as a person and how that relates to working in community, and how that relates to working as a collective, it is really come through. And I think I won't go over the full model in detail, but I will nitpick some particular things that I think is helpful for when you're trying to ground yourself before you go into action mode. So there's 7 values altogether. They all start with the letter C. So the 7 C's. And my boss / friend, who is an amazing human being, has made a personal amendment to the social change model, that if you kind of understand the 7 C's, that leads to the 8th C, which is change. I think that's a really cool way of thinking about it. So there's 3 groupings for the social change model. There's the values that are surrounded, to do with who you are as a person. And then there's values that are related to community and collaboration. And then there's the last value, which is about, thinking on a bigger scale, how we connected globally or as a collective on that wider level. And the values that are about the individual, they're all about who you are as a person. Like, what are your values? Do you walk the walk? Are you committed? And then the group values are all about, well, how is it that you show up and work in collaboration, and how do you work in community? Because the whole idea with the social change model is that, there is an element that requires you to do the work on yourself, but when it comes to action and when it comes to doing things, that's actually done in community. But in community, what are your guiding principles that help you work with other people? And then linking that mahi, the individual mahi, your mahi with community, and linking that to the wider value and to this sense of global citizenship. Even though we're living all the way here in Aotearoa, how is it that, what we do here can, link up with climate change, or link up with other political events that are happening around the world. Like, what does social justice look like on a wider scale? But we're doing it here from our own little corner of the world. And there's a particular C value that I keep coming back to when I'm trying to reset and when I'm trying to ground myself into thinking about how is it that I want to show up. And I suppose the first C value actually would be consciousness of self. And that is being conscious of who you are as a person. So, what is it that's really important to you? What are your values? And the thing with values is that it's never going to be the case of, not that I don't think that's an important value to me. It's condensing it down to the level where these are the key values to me that I just will not compromise on those values. These are the values that are so important to me that I actively make sure that I am living by these values in every facet of life. And I had to do that exercise with my therapist, and also when I was getting to know the social change value, we were going through value practices, and it's actually so hard because in answering that question of what are the most important values to me, and when you're kind of thinking about it at that level, it's not that many values, it's like 5 to 10 tops. It's almost asking well, who am I as a person? And I think when you have that knowledge about who you are as a person, it is really grounding and a really powerful framing of how you want to live your life, on a personal sense, but how you want to live your life, in a social justice sense as well. And so kind of once you have that knowledge about your values and your strengths and your communities and what it is that you want to do in life. And again, I totally acknowledge that that's a really big question, but it's something that's ever evolving. It's not going to be one question that you're set with for the rest of your life. This is questions that you can always come back to, and your answers can change. It's not something that's set in stone. But kind of once you have that value or that knowledge of self kind of set in stone, then there is these two other values that I think are really important to think about, which is congruence and commitment. And those two things, they sound similar off the bat, but there is actually a subtle difference there. But I think when you understand that subtle difference, the way that you can show up for the things that you really care about in this world, and the way that you can show up for kaupapas that you're really interested in, I don't know. I think, well, for me anyway, it was quite life-changing. So, for example, so let me just quickly explain congruence and commitment, because off the bat, they do sound quite similar. And feel free to look it up in the dictionary, the official or the proper way of explaining it. I'm going to explain it the Amal way. So welcome to the Amal dictionary. And I'm going to explain it in a way where I have understood this. So to me, commitment is, what you choose to... I'm trying to say, trying to explain it without actually using the word commit, what you choose to prioritize, what you choose to do. It's like a promise loosely of some sort. And congruence is okay, well, you are talking the talk, can you walk the walk as well? Like, are you backing up what you say your beliefs and values are with action? And I feel like you can always be congruent to your values, but your commitment can be quite different. And this is where, you need to take stock of your life and figure out, what is feasible for you in that time. And just to make it a bit more understandable, I'll give you an example from my life just to kind of highlight that. So for me, the environment is very, very important. I love Mother Nature. I love being outdoors. It's something that is precious and should be looked after. And Lord knows the way that climate change is already wreaking havoc on our planet and causing damage that, Mother Nature she is not happy right now. And honestly, fair enough, because our systems are not sustainable. They are not great. They would make anyone ill. And so, because Mother Nature is so precious to me, that is an important value. It is an important kaupapa for me to think about sustainability, for me to think about, to be committed to living in a world where climate change doesn't wreak havoc on us and on our planet. So it's something that is important to me, and I will always try my best to be congruent to that. But if I'm thinking about my life acutely right now with everything that is going on, my commitment isn't very high. If you think about the scale of like low to high commitment, I'm not actively involved in any sustainability groups right now. There's definitely more that I could be doing, but just with everything that's going on in my plate, on the scale of commitment, it perhaps isn't so high. But what I am committing to, I am committing to that because I want to be congruent. So, for example, if I am, like one of my rules is that if I didn't bring my keep cup, then I have to have the coffee there. And if I don't have the time to have the coffee there, then I'll leave it. I just won't have the drink. And I've had this rule for maybe like 5 years now. And in that 5 years, I feel like I've only like broken that commitment maybe like 3 times. But yeah, that's one of the things that I'm like, okay, I'm committing to that. I know that in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot. But because sustainability is a kaupapa that I'm really interested in and I really believe in, then I will be congruent to that little commitment that I do have. Or if it's possible to carpool to an event together, then I will do that. Or if I'm needing something, I will try to rent it or borrow from family or a friend. So again, all of these things are pretty low scale in the terms of like commitment. I will be the first to admit that I ain't no Greta Thunberg in the scale of commitment, but that sustainability is a value that's really important to me. So I will try my best to be congruent to that. Because I think when people think about, well, what does it, mean to show up for a kaupapa or to be a better ally, I think there's this idea of like, go 100% or do nothing, or also we've all got to do it in the same way, which none of those things are true. But I think if we all had that conversation amongst ourselves around congruence versus commitment, then, that kind of framing, I think, lends itself to sustainable activism, even if that looks like a low commitment. It lends itself to a sustainable practice. And, I just kind of want to give some explanation as to why sustainability for me at the moment, the commitment to it isn't crazy high. It's just because there's other kaupapas at the moment that I'm more committed to, and I don't want to spread myself too thin. I don't want to be in that stagnant, not overflowing state. And so for me, this is what this commitment looks like. And I think another really cool thing about this congruence versus commitment thing is that when it comes to activism, or when it comes to showing up for kaupapas, or being a better ally, there's I think the way that we think about it, even though it is the same thing, but there's things that you can do on an activist kind of level, and then just how you live your personal day-to-day life. And so, with my commitment, we'll go back to the sustainability example, just so to make this a bit more colourful and to make this make sense. The commitment that I have to anything sustainability related right now is very much related to how I live my day-to-day life. But if you were to ask me, what does your, activist life look like in regards to sustainability? I mean, there's cobwebs. There's cobwebs in that area, because it's not like I'm going to marches. It's not like I'm actively involved in a group right now. I haven't I can't remember the last time I went to a protest that was related to sustainability. It's been a hot minute. But because it is an important value to me, it is something that I'm still going to be congruent to, even if it doesn't, quote, even though it doesn't look like a quote unquote activist life right now. It's something that I am congruent to, and I am congruent to the small commitments that I make in my day-to-day life. And it's something that I hope will change over time, but just right now, this is what it's looking like. And I think if you are able to have that conversation with yourself around congruence versus commitment when it comes to the values that you say are really important to you and the kaupapas that you want to show up for, if you have that conversation with yourself around congruence versus commitment, I think it makes a really big difference. And it's really freeing in the sense that you're committing to something that is sustainable for you in that moment, and that can change, and it will change, but you're able to have that honest conversation with yourself. And I'm not going to go over the other values of the social change model, but if this is something that tickles your fancy, if you just Google social change model, there's lots of notes online. But if you wanted to have a kōrero about it, or if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up, because I love the social change model. I'm like, if there's a fan club for the social change model, sign me up. I'm in it. I absolutely love the social change model, and it's really good framing for how to think about yourself in relation to community, in relation to like the big wide world and global citizenship. It's fantastic. I'm a really big geek and a really big nerd, and my nerdy ass hardcore thirsts for the social change model is great. But I really just wanted to pick out the congruence versus commitment specifically for this episode. Other things to know before you go, and I think this first point is really, really important. So, as I've said on the show many a time, that in our one being, there will be places and spaces and parts of the system that we live in where we do not have the privilege. And there, maybe some spaces where we, in fact, do have privilege. So I just want to acknowledge that this is complicated, and it's not like someone's entirely privileged or someone's entirely underprivileged. I'm sure that those situations exist, but if you think about the majority of us, we're kind of a mixture of both, depending on the context and depending on where we are, what hats we're currently wearing at that point in time in our lives. But I think one thing that is really important to know before you go is understand that your basic needs need to be met first. I think if there's any kind of if there's any kind of action, any kind of kaupapa that you really want to get involved in, if you want to engage in, that next step after awareness, which, because to me awareness is about, understanding what's going on, educating yourself, and now you're aware, and another disclaimer, that you can never be aware enough. Not like this, like, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I am aware of everything. Awareness is something that, or your education or sense of knowledge is something that will always need to be revisited, updated. You need to continuously commit to that, because it's a forever journey. Just like how when you leave the education system, life will always be teaching you something, as I have been painfully made aware of in my adult years. But I'm talking about, when you've kind of gotten to that point where you're aware to the point where it's like not physically painful, but you're aware to the point where it's like there is the point of no return. Do you know what I mean? Like, now that you know this, it's something that you cannot ignore. I think that's how I would put it. When you're at that point of awareness, and then you kind of want to move into the action phase, or like asking yourself questions of like, how can I show up for this kaupapa? How can I support? How can I help? How can I be a better ally? When you're kind of in that energy, in that phase, know that your basic needs need to be met first. And when I'm talking about basic needs, I'm talking about like, do you have a roof over your head? Are you getting, 3 meals a day and snacks? Are you connected with community? Or do you have people in your life that care for you, love you? Do you have access to like your foundational needs? And I think the reason why it's really important to have that first is that, you know, to even have that overflow state where you're filling your cup up so much that it overflows into others, you know, you need to have, if we're really running with this metaphor, you need to have a cup to begin with that you can then fill up. That cup is your basic needs. If you do not have a cup, if your basic needs are not being met, then focus on yourself. Focus on getting those basic needs. And I understand that the communities that that perhaps don't have those basic needs, it's not, you know, acquiring that metaphorical cup will not be done by oneself. It will be done in community and asking for help. So, you know, when I'm saying focus on yourself, I'm not saying you need to do all of this work by yourself. Ask for help. Get the support that you need to have your basic needs met. And, you know, when you've kind of ticked off the basic needs, which is, you know, a roof over your head, you know, like stable housing, 3 meals a day, that type of thing, then I feel like there's another tier of basic needs, which is feeling rested. Because if we want, like, you know, the work that needs to be done and the work that will continue despite, you know, despite what is happening in the world, or despite who our elected leaders are, the work will be done, and the work will be done by community, and it will be done by grassroots initiatives. You know, because we're working in community, the beauty of that is that it doesn't rest on any particular person's shoulders. So please make sure that your basic needs are met first before, you know, really jumping into go mode. Please make sure that your basic needs are met, because if your basic needs aren't met, then there's no way that overflow state can be reached. So that's first thing when it comes to things to know before you go. Second thing, having that good, like a solid foundation of awareness / knowledge. And I also want to put a disclaimer out there that for some people, depending on the kaupapa that we're talking about, depending on whatever system of oppression that we're talking about, that there will be some communities, there will be some people who do not have to go out and seek out that awareness or knowledge, because it is your day-to-day reality. You know, for example, I only ever use examples about myself because I feel like I can only speak for myself. You know, but for example, for me, as a Black woman, there are some things about racism I do not need to learn about in a documentary or in a book or in a podcast, because it's my reality, boo. As a Muslim woman, I don't need to go educate myself about Islamophobia. I have been on the receiving end of that Islamophobia. But if, you know, there are experiences or kaupapas that you are not aware about, then go out and seek that knowledge or seek that awareness. And there are so many avenues to do that, which, doesn't include you, going to the person of that community to then ask them, hey, tell me about your, tell me about the trauma and associated with being marginalized from this particular system or not having this particular privilege. There are so many ways to get that knowledge, but you want to get to that point, as I was saying before, where you're building up awareness and knowledge to the point where it's hard to ignore, where there isn't, that sense of bliss that comes from ignorance has been shattered. And that sounds really, it sounds dramatic, like, whoa, ignorance being shattered, it sounds so dramatic, but like, that's low-key what it's about though, because when things are so exposed to you like that, it gets to the point where like, you do have to pay attention to it because it's just there. It maybe wasn't there before, or maybe it was something so little that it didn't show up in your life so much. But you want to build so much awareness that is something that you can no longer ignore. That's kind of, the education, the awareness will always be an ongoing thing, but you kind of want to get to that point first. Because if you don't get to that point first, the way I have had, and again, I can only speak for myself, the way that I have had people, when the Christchurch terrorist attack happened, or when the Black Lives Matter movement really had a big resurgence back in 2020, the way that people were coming to me with their acts of allyship in a way where even if it was well-intentioned, it wasn't helpful to me or to the cause. And I think it was because people got so swept up in it, they kind of skipped that step of like building that awareness or that sense of knowledge. And it just led to acts of solidarity or allyship, which just, if it wasn't performative, then, it just wasn't helpful, even if it was well-intentioned. So yes, get that good foundation of knowledge / awareness. Understand that your actions need to flow from the space of not coming from guilt or shame, because the same thing with the lack of awareness or knowledge, it doesn't lead to acts that are helpful to the cause, but understand that your actions need to come from this place of redirecting from the status quo. It needs to come from a place of community. It needs to come from a place of where your knowledge and awareness is at. It needs to be coming from that productive energy. And I know it sounds like so obvious, but unless you're like actively reflecting about it, it's crazy how much of people's allyship and activism comes from that energy of guilt and shame. Really reframe where that energy is coming from, because there is a really big difference between doing something because you're feeling ashamed about it or guilty about it, than, something coming from a place of community, something that comes from a place of learning or systemic thinking or strategic thinking. there's a huge difference of the impact of those actions depending on the energy source. And then that kind of reminds me that when you are ready to go, know that you need to be ready to reflect, baby. I think action without reflection, I don't know, it's just a reaction or something. Like, it's not, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to think about, this is what I've done. What has been the impact of this? Has it actually been helpful? If you're just all go, go, go without the reflection, you might not be, you might think you're going somewhere, but you could just be spending a whole lot of energy staying at the same spot. You won't know if your impact is actually helpful or needed. So be prepared to reflect. And when I say reflection, it doesn't mean that we all need to buy journals and start journaling. I know that journaling is not for everyone. For me, I love journaling. I've always been a big journal girly. I love it. I think when I see my thoughts written on a piece of paper, it is so healing. It gives me a really big opportunity to really process and digest and sit with it. But not everyone works like that. Reflect in a way that makes sense to you, whether it's, reflecting, with people, if those people, are happy to reflect with you. It could mean just taking time for yourself, going for a walk, thinking about things while you're going for a walk. It could be if it means going to therapy, that could look like going to therapy. Like, reflecting doesn't necessarily mean journaling. Keep it cool, keep it fun, keep it fresh, keep it funky. Whatever that looks like to you, you can reflect in many ways. But folks, you need to reflect, period. And the last little thing to know before you go is audit your life right now. And when I say that, I'm talking about just take stock, what are your energy levels like? Where is this energy going to? Where is your money going to? Where is your time going to? Does it align with your values? Because if not, there's a golden opportunity to rejudge things. So when you think about all the resources that you have, they're being used in a way that aligns with who you are as a person, what your values are, and what is it that you really care about. So audit your life, do a life audit. And also, you can make that fun. You don't have to necessarily do that while writing it down on a piece of paper. It could be a fun chat with people you also want to bring along for the ride. Keep it fun. Hopefully these things have been good reframings when thinking about the things you need to know before you go. I know that 2024 was a lot and so many things happened. And even now, with 2025, it's only been 2 weeks and I feel like a lot has happened already. And so very much the work needs to be done and the work will be continued. And we will need people, everyone, to go, go, go. But think about things you need to know before you go. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns, and catch you for the next one.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.